So please ask your questions in the ask a question part at the bottom. We're going to try and get to as many of your questions as possible. I have some of my own, obviously, but please, we want to make this as interactive as possible. I have one little announcement before we get going. We have a giveaway. So if you fill out a survey, which you'll see the link put in the chat, and I think also on at the bottom of your screen, where we have one of 5 6-month front-end master subscriptions thanks to Cloudinary. So if you fill out the little survey about our event, you have a chance to win one of 5 6-month front-end masters subscriptions. So check for that link. And now we're going to do a little fireside chat with Tom Preston-Werner. Tom co-founded GitHub. He's currently the co-founder of Chatterbug, a language learning company, and he's the co-creator of RedwoodJS. He also created Jekyll, semantic versioning, and Toml. So, just a few things. He's living in Northern California. Tom likes to hike among big trees and coastal cliffs. Please welcome Tom.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So, I mentioned that you created Jekyll. When was that? It was a long time ago, right?
Yeah, I guess it must have been around 2010, maybe somewhere in that area. 2000.
Yeah,
it was early GitHub days.
Yeah, I think it was. I know I've written about it. I think it was like 2009 or something like that. Yeah. So in many ways, you kind of helped create the modern Jamstack with Jekyll. I think we talked to so many people here, and every one of them was like, "Yeah, I got my start with Jekyll." So it was like kind of the gateway towards building sites using a static site generator. So tell us a bit about what drove you to create that back in 2009.
Yeah, Jekyll really came out of this realization from doing GitHub and really getting into Git that you could do content in a different way. I guess I was really tired of losing all of my blog content, all of my writing to various WordPress blogs that I'd hosted on random services, and I'd blog for a while and then I'd kind of take a break, and eventually whatever the hosted service was would go out of business or get shut down, or my credit card would stop paying for it and they'd shut it down on my behalf. And then all that content would just kind of disappear. I was not particularly good at backing up the databases for those WordPress sites. And once we were working on GitHub, it just felt like you didn't really need a database for this. You didn't need all the security concerns or the hassle of setting up a WordPress site or something similar just to put some content on the internet. Really, I just wanted to be able to write my blog the same way that I wrote code in my text editor, just write the post in Markdown and be able to push it to a Git repository and have it automatically deployed. That was kind of the beautiful thing. And it was funny at the time, people were trying to think of like, how could you use FTP to do this? Or it was like, how could we use Git to replace FTP? Like this is what we were used to, kind of using FTP to just update files live on a server. And so the idea there was, what if you used Git and a Git repository instead of FTP, essentially, so that you just push to your Git repository, GitHub could pick it up and then publish it. And so that's where GitHub Pages really came from, was this idea of doing that. I built Jekyll after we started GitHub Pages with the idea that we needed more processing. So it's like, now that you can put HTML onto a GitHub repository and get it up live, like that's cool, but I don't want to write HTML. I want to write Markdown and have it automatically converted to HTML for me and templated and everything. And there were 1 or 2 static site generators out there that could do kind of that, but they didn't do it the way that I wanted. I wanted it to be more blog centric and do some things differently. And so that's really where Jekyll came from, and that was the core concept around it, and it just became a very powerful part then of GitHub Pages, which I think really rocketed Jekyll to success. I think that's the primary aspect there, that people use Jekyll because of GitHub Pages, but it became just a really nice solution if you wanted to get content online and not have to worry about hosting.
Right. Yeah, I think GitHub Pages was kind of my first introduction to that kind of workflow, because some of the early things I built with Jekyll and other tools were actually using FTP to push the site up, or some other tools that effectively were just automating the FTP. So like that workflow of kind of just checking something into GitHub and having it published was like GitHub Pages was the first experience I had with that. But now it's like, I think for developers today, it's like, yeah, that's normal, isn't that? Isn't that what we always did? So
Right.
yeah. So you mentioned that Jekyll was kind of like focused on building a blog initially, and so back when the Jamstack term was created, it was kind of to counter that sense of like oh, hey, Jamstack tools are just for blogs or documentation, right? So were you a fan of the term at the time? Are you a fan of it now? I mean, what do you what do you feel like is a good way to describe what it is we do, or a good term to describe what we do?
Well, it's an interesting story. So the term Jamstack was coined by the founders of Netlify, and I got involved with them very early on in their journey when it was just, I think, the two of them, Matt and Chris. And the term Jamstack was something that we talked about extensively at some bars in the Dog Patch in San Francisco when they were just setting out and trying to define what Netlify was going to be and where they were going and how they were going to try to capture the industry. And how do you talk about the ideas behind what we now know of as the Jamstack without a term? Because at the time, before we had the term Jamstack, it was all static site generators. But when you say a static site, this does not to people necessarily convey that you're going to use JavaScript to pull in third-party APIs or do dynamic things or pull in external content and kind of mix it all together. And so static site generation did not do the job. And so that's where Jamstack really came from. And to me, I thought it was great. It always makes me think of Ajax back in the when Google Maps first came out, and it blew everyone's mind that like you could drag this map around and it would just like load stuff in automatically. And this concept that Ajax became was, I mean, it was out there, like all the pieces were there, but nobody thought about it and no one could really leverage it because no one could talk about it until Ajax was coined. And now this whole concept, this more complex concept, had a name and everyone could talk about how they were going to do Ajax. And to me, Jamstack was the same kind of a thing. So I love the term. They were wondering if they should push it, and I very much suggested that they should. And would it work? Who knows, right? Like anytime you try to coin something, your chances of success are fairly low, but you don't know until you try. And so I really pushed them to try it, and they started getting it out there. And I think it's been a huge success because the industry needed a name for what Jamstack is, this collection of technologies that allows you to have better security, faster sites. All of these characteristics that Jamstack has are now wrapped up into one word that you can now talk to your colleagues about, talk to your boss about, that Netlify can talk to potential customers about. It's just a very big shortcut. Instead of saying static site generation plus JavaScript to mediate third-party APIs, like it's a little faster to say.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it was critical in terms of building the community around the tooling and just as you said. I mean, I could write a book with Jamstack and people understand what this book is about. I can start a community group that's focused on Jamstack, or run a conference that says Jamstack, and it people understand what it is going to be about, and it's really important. In fact, like this has even gotten into some of the newer debates about we're now talking about what is Jamstack, what's not Jamstack, because it keeps shifting. And I think something you're working on is part of that shift in a way. So you're working on RedwoodJS, which calls itself a full stack Jamstack solution. How did you decide after building Jekyll back in 2009 to jump back into building tools for the Jamstack ecosystem? And what do you think that Redwood provides that other tools aren't providing it?
I love Jamstack in the way that most people think about it even today, because it really is this descendant of Jekyll and the ideas that started there. But I think it can go even further. And so to me, there's a lot of potential in what you can do in a serverless environment now. And if you mix that with some of the ideas around static site generation and third-party APIs, or even just JavaScript on the front end, in the client talking to something, some kind of an API on the back end. Like that's cool, but what I want to do is create a custom website completely from scratch and probably not even use a lot of third-party APIs. I might pick and choose a few here and there, but I want to build a custom site that is doing a lot of its own business logic. And so being involved in Netlify in the early days, when they came out with their functions support, where you can just write the body of a Lambda function, essentially in a file, they'll pick it up and then deploy it to AWS Lambda for you. That was kind of a revelation for me in what could be possible using this stack, because nobody wants to use AWS's ways to get your code into AWS Lambda. Like it's just not pleasant, right? You got to zip it up. And like, if I'm zipping files, then I'm, as a developer, like it just is, this is the FTP era of thinking. It's like, zip file, really? Like I'm going to zip it. I'm going to zip up my code. Like, I'm just not going to do it, right? I want to write code. I want to push it to GitHub and I want something to deploy it, right? And that's exactly what Netlify is trying to do. And that made me think, if you have a client, a statically deliverable JavaScript client that can then also include business logic that you could deploy to AWS Lambda and have this whole thing be serverless and very fast, and statically deliver the client to the browser. Browser then talks to business logic running in AWS Lambda. Then really what you need next is a database. And if you can get a database going, then you could have this model that becomes very scalable, available worldwide. If you do read replicas for your database, if you can get that going, then you can push all of these things out as far to the edge as you can. And you can get a level of architectural simplicity and scalability for a tremendously small amount of effort. And thinking about that made me want to find a framework that was going to let me do that. And I looked around and I just didn't really see much that was doing that at the time. And this is more than 2 years ago now that we started working on these ideas that are now in RedwoodJS. And then today you have things like Next, which have really exploded in popularity. And I think for exactly this reason, people are realizing that this architecture is so powerful. But it's still not, Next is still not really focused on a full stack solution. And so Redwood is trying to take these ideas architecturally, but also ideas around React and friends on the front end, and make technology choices for you and integrate a lot of the technologies together. So if you say, well, I like React and I like Jest for testing, and I like Storybook for doing my development outside of the actual product environment, so that I can so that people can do that more easily. And I want to use GraphQL, so I'm going to use Apollo and bring that in. The amount of effort that it takes to integrate all these pieces together in a really robust way is very large, and most people don't have the time to do it well. And so people cobble these technologies together, and the technologies are amazing and they work really well together, but getting them to work well together is tremendously challenging. So Redwood is also this idea that we can do the integration for you, and that then you can get to what makes your app special faster, and then deploy it onto something like Netlify in a much easier way than you ever thought possible. There's still elements of the database that are still outstanding, and I think this is the future of where the Jamstack can go. But to me, the Jamstack now also, it includes ideas around full stack.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that what you said there, because I've always thought of the modern Jamstack developer, but web developer in general, like it's almost like the conductor of an orchestra who has to like understand the parts of everybody's part of the piece, right, in order to conduct properly. Like there's so many different pieces that they're orchestrating at this point, and understanding each of those pieces can get really complex. And things like RedwoodJS are kind of changing how that works by kind of bringing that all under one umbrella, so that you don't have to worry as much about how those things are orchestrated, because that's kind of handled by the framework.
Right. Yes, exactly. Well said.
Okay, we're going to get to some. Actually, we have a number of questions from the audience. So I'm going to get to those. So Meg asks, the adoption rate of Jamstack is increasing at a fast pace. Which current technology do you think will go away in the near future? jQuery, Bootstrap, REST APIs? Oh, she's putting you on the spot here to get like somebody's gonna go ahead and like start posting this to Reddit or something right away.
Well, I don't, I mean, my knee jerk reaction is to just say all of them, but I don't think that that's, I don't actually think that that's true. I think it's all about the right technology for the job. I think if you're doing something that you need done very quickly and you're comfortable with jQuery, then use jQuery. Like that is a perfect solution for a certain set of problems. You know, we built GitHub with Rails in very traditional ways with jQuery for the first, probably 6-7 years or more. And the technology, at the end of the day, the technology doesn't actually matter. What matters is, are you building a product that has value for your customers? If you can do that, then no one will care what your technology is built in, right? Do you know what Facebook's built with? Do you know what Slack is built with? Like the answers to these questions may shock and surprise you. Like you don't have to use all these modern technologies to build value. However, I think that today, because we have access to these technologies, if you choose them and become comfortable with them, then you can go further, faster. So one thing that I think that you see now that you didn't see much back when we started GitHub was that you have this duality between desktop websites and mobile websites. And most businesses are going to eventually want both, or you at least want a mobile version of your web app, which is also becomes challenging to do. But if you do want a web app and a mobile app, now you're faced with a big question around the technologies that you choose and how you do that. And at my current startup called Chatterbug, which is a language learning application, we have a web app and we have a mobile app. And because we started the web app originally in Rails in a very traditional way, just as we did at GitHub, because the 4 founders of Chatterbug are also all of us are former GitHubbers. We chose a stack that looks pretty similar to what we were comfortable with there. As time went on, we realized that React could give us a lot of benefits. And so we started doing the front end, the templating side of Rails with React and just passing in a value. So it was all server side still. And we kept going down that road. And now we've moved over to even using GraphQL, and the front end is now a full client-side React app that talks GraphQL to the back end. And the back end is a Ruby, is Rails, but with a Ruby-based GraphQL API, which is quite nice. But the mobile app, it makes you wonder then about the mobile app. You're like, okay, well, our mobile app, we chose React Native from the beginning because we had already started using React on the websites. We're like, well, maybe we can get some reuse here and have the same developers. And so we went down that route, and it became very nice. Redwood is really an encapsulation of some of these ideas. But if you start from the beginning, if you can start from scratch and you can say, well, if I'm going to have a GraphQL API anyway, maybe I should just have a GraphQL API, and my front ends should all just consume a single GraphQL API, so that you don't end up having to write your website in Rails in the normal Rails way, and then realize that you need a mobile app, and now have to also create a GraphQL API. And now you're maintaining essentially 2 sets of business logic, and right, and this has now increased your complexity by a significant amount. And so Redwood says, we expect you to have multiple clients, whether it be a web app or a mobile app or a command line interface or a kiosk at a mall or whatever it happens to be. Then the reuse of a single GraphQL API can get you there. And so to answer the initial question, I sometimes get distracted and talk about Redwood no matter what. But to answer the original question, none of these technologies are going to disappear. It's how you use them and what you want to select from the beginning to try to make your path easier. Like if you choose PHP today, you can go very far. But can you go as far as you would if you chose different technologies? These are always the questions. And so, we still use technologies that existed 50 years ago. I don't think jQuery is going anywhere. I don't think any of the other technologies that were mentioned are going to go anywhere. Their popularity will probably decrease as the complexity of people's apps increases. That's why I use React. using React for a very small application is maybe overkill. But if you have a large application with a lot of state management and you need a lot of interactivity, then reasoning about that is much easier in React. So you can get the job done in both, but which one is going to make your long-term maintainability easier? That's the real question you should ask.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I love your point there about, we sometimes as developers focus a lot on the specific technologies but in the end, that doesn't really matter to the end user. It only matters to us, but it does, as you say, impact like how quickly we can get something out there, how well we can maintain it, and being able to target the different platforms that we need to target for an application. So yeah, great points all around. So on Asensio asks, the way things are going, is the growing adoption of Jamstack better or worse for the end users of the web, and why? It's kind of related to the last question, but similar but different angle.
I think it's better. I may be biased, however. Yeah. I think it's better, and I'll try to explain why. So to me, Jamstack attempts to be a simplification, and it creates a couple of advantages. One is around speed. So the more that you can deliver statically, the faster that you can get. You don't have to wait for a server to generate pages and then deliver them. Of course, you can have caching and that in the more traditional way, but Jamstack is in its current. Let's talk about it from a more marketing site way. Like you're not going to get faster than a statically delivered site from a CDN. It's just not going to happen, right? So you're as fast as you can get there. From a security perspective, the less code that you run on the server, the more secure that you will be. And so in these ways, you are also extremely secure. You're not running code on the server. Maybe you have a client that is running some code in your browser. And you also get advantages there of responsiveness, that you get your interface is doing things faster if you can do certain things locally. And those things lead to a much better user experience. I think there are caveats with the Jamstack when it comes to some full stack types of things where you have trade-offs, and like every technology is always a set of trade-offs. So the trade-offs with Jamstack, when you're doing the version where you're putting React, building like a client-side React application, are around page load times for content that is going to be fully dynamically delivered, because now you have to worry about how much JavaScript is being delivered to the client. You have to download the JavaScript, parse the JavaScript, execute the JavaScript. And if you don't do that well, then you can end up having to deliver megabytes of data to get a single page load that itself may be very simple. So there's trade-offs. It really depends on your use case. Now, I think there are, you can marry the two. You can statically deliver part of your website and then allow it to be filled in through an asynchronous call to the content so that you get the content very quickly, whatever is able to become static, and then you can get the dynamic bits to come in later, which leads to a very good compromise between these two things, probably better than either a fully static or a fully dynamic situation. This increases complexity, however, and so managing that complexity is something that has to be dealt with. In Redwood, we're trying to help you manage that complexity by making it easy to decide where along that spectrum you want to be. But to me, again, it's not necessarily about technology specifically. It's about choosing the right technology for the right job. And if you can deliver a faster experience to the end user, then that technology is better for the end user. If for some reason you've chosen the Jamstack, but you're doing it in a way that is not really leveraging the powers of the Jamstack, the advantages of the Jamstack, and you're delivering pages slowly, then that's not good for the end user. So again, the technology is less important than what we choose for a specific job and how well you do at taking advantages of those technologies.
Right. Yeah, I think sometimes we focus so heavily on things like the performance of Jamstack apps that some people think, oh, if I just do Jamstack, my performance problems are solved. And it's not really. Yes, you can make a bad performing Jamstack app. I mean, it's how you use the tools that you're given.
Right. You can write bad code in any language. You can create slow websites with any framework.
Right. Right. Exactly. Speaking of tools, so the next question is from Brian, not me, Brian, the other Brian who spells his name wrong. Do you think there's still a place for true static site generators? Hugo, Leaventy, Bridgetown, obviously Jekyll would fall under that, versus the hybrid and full stack Jamstack models?
Yeah, 100%. Again, is it the right tool for the job? If you just want to put a blog online, I would suggest that a static site generator is still your best option. It's because it's simple. If you don't need the interactive elements that React is going to make it easy for you to create, then you very well may not need the full power of Gatsby, right? Gatsby has a set of problems that it solves extremely well. Jekyll has a different set of problems that it solves extremely well. And simplicity matters, because the more complex something is, the more difficult it is to maintain, the more time and money and energy that you will spend maintaining it. And so these choices do matter, even if it's just to you personally, right? The beauty of the Jamstack is hopefully that you can just ship it and it's done, and you don't have to ever worry about it again. And you don't have to worry about, like with Jekyll, Jekyll changes so slowly now that a Jekyll site that you write today is probably going to work in the same framework 10 years from now, honestly, right? And backwards compatibility is a big deal. Is that true of some of these more sophisticated frameworks? Probably not. Like, you want to upgrade those frameworks to take advantage of the things going on. So in that sense, choose the right amount of complexity for the job. Simple. If you need to do something simple, choose a tool that will allow you to do things simply. If you need to do something really sophisticated and complex, then choose a tool that will allow you to manage that complexity. Absolutely. There's always room for a variety of solutions. And one of my favorite things to do is completely ignore the advice that you should not create a new solution to a problem, right? Everyone always points to that XKCD comic where the person suggests that everyone's doing it wrong, and they're going to build the proper solution to it, and then the next panel is like, and now there's 19 solutions to the problem, right? Well, guess what? We need 100 solutions to the problem. Like, when it comes to code, we need solutions to all of the varying degrees of complexity that are out there. And the only reason that we have any of the things that we have today is because someone created the 19th or 50th version of whatever it was. And so I encourage everyone that I run into to always build new stuff. You'll often find that you're solving a set of problems that some portion of people have in a way that other people are not.
Right. Yeah, I think it gets back to, and Brian also makes a point in chat. He says rule of least power in Jamstack, which is like, I've often argued that sometimes the J being first in the acronym ended up making people think, oh, this is all about Jamstack. Jamstack's all about React or JavaScript frameworks, and it's like, there's a lot you can build with just like just a regular static site generator and a little bit of plain old JavaScript, and you have like all kinds of dynamic things that as you mentioned about performance, like bringing in a framework when you don't need one is sometimes not necessarily good practice, right? But it can be really, really powerful when you need one. So it's just about making those right choices. So let's see. Ishan has a question. He says, what's the biggest obstacle that the Jamstack needs to solve to grow adoption in the market and cross the chasm from adopters to the rest of the market? From early adopters, I guess. Yeah.
That one's tough. Probably the answer is time. I think this is true of a lot of technologies, that it just takes time to trickle up from random developers experimenting with technologies on our blogs and toy websites and experiments to end up in the big enterprises where they're willing to take a risk on a technology. This was the same was true for GitHub. Like, you couldn't make the adoption of Git go much faster than it went, I think. Like, we could have poured zillions of dollars into marketing and tried to make it happen, but I don't think it would have mattered, because the pace of development goes at a certain rate, and the rate of companies adopting new technologies goes at a certain rate. And trying to accelerate that artificially is challenging. I think it can be changed a little bit, but it can't be changed a lot. And so I think it's really time. It's really the people in the organizations have to have enough familiarity with these technologies to suggest using them. And then the companies have to see enough other players using them to feel like they're not going to be laughed at if for some reason it doesn't work out. Right. Or that that this is an unreasonable risk for a new product that they're going to invest a ton in if they don't know that their technology is going to be supported a year from now. And so large companies wait. And the Jamstack, even in its current formulation, not even touching any of the full stack kind of stuff, is still only a few years old. And in the time span of technology, internet technologies, that's both incredibly fast and incredibly slow, right? Like, it's amazing how fast some of these technologies can be adopted, but at the same time, enterprises work at a rate that is a lot slower than that. It takes probably at least 5 years and more like 10 years for that kind of adoption to really permeate the largest enterprises. And so I think it's time. I think the technology has proven itself, and it's really just about being around long enough for enough smaller players to have done enough with it that it becomes no longer risky to think about doing it from an enterprise perspective.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I've seen, having been around this for a while myself, I mean, the past year or so has really started to change, where before we were talking like startups and things like that who are taking chance on it, but now you see more big companies taking a chance, and not just that, but like more companies jumping in, seeing like, okay, there's opportunity here. I need to be in this market, and serving Jamstack developers, which, like, it was Netlify was there early, but like now Microsoft's jumping and Cloudflare, and so I mean, it's
exactly.
Yeah.
The more vendors start having Jamstack solutions, the more that will then translate to enterprises saying, "Oh, this is mainstream. This isn't risky anymore. This is a real thing. We can use this. They can understand. They spend resources to understand it and learn how it can apply to their set of problems, and then leverage it to solve those problems better." And yeah, it's just a process. It takes time.
Exactly. I even mentioned earlier that, one of the companies I work for, I started to find, I was in the marketing department. I found that they often looked at what other companies are doing to decide what they're going to adopt. Like, oh, well, why would we adopt Jamstack? Because look at our competitors. They're all on WordPress. We need to be WordPress. And it's like, okay, I get it. So that's why it's harder to move that needle when, you have to get one to take a chance.
This is why startups have a huge advantage when it comes to moving fast and solving problems that enterprises can't touch. Enterprises can't move that quickly. Yeah. It's just the nature of, like, there's too much to lose. It's always risk. A startup risks everything if they don't innovate fast enough to solve customers' problems. Enterprises lose everything if they choose the wrong technologies and then fail with them and can't like get back up to speed or whatnot, right? Or you try to do something and it alienates your existing customer base. So again, startups have a great advantage there. Nothing to lose. It's amazing what you can do when you have nothing to lose.
Right. And on that note, you mentioned how young Jamstack is in the end, really. I mean, some of the tools like Jekyll have been around for a long time, but the concept that really forms what the Jamstack is only 4 years old. I think 2016 was when the term was coined, right? Whereas, and I always feel like we're constantly like competing against technologies that have been around forever. Like everybody's like a Jamstack versus WordPress, and WordPress has been around. I mean, I forget how long's it been. Feels like it's been my entire life that WordPress has been around. So
yeah, like 20 years at least, I think.
Yeah. So it's like, one product, if you look back at WordPress when it was 4 years old, I guarantee you'd be like, wait, how did this technology become so popular? So, it takes time to mature, right?
Yep, exactly.
So another question from the audience. probably given time limits, maybe our last one. So what was the inspiration behind TOML? We're changing gears a little bit, but
TOML is near and dear to my heart. TOML is a configuration language. TOML stands for Tom's Obvious Minimal Language. TOML started as a joke, essentially. I was at home. I think my wife was on a fieldwork trip down to Guatemala, and I had nothing else to do. And so I popped open a beer and I started working on an idea that I'd had for a long time, which was, I wish that we had a good configuration language. Like, everything was terrible. YAML is terrible because it's super ambiguous, and like it just doesn't read well. And the spec's like 80 pages long, and it's got security problems. JSON, you can't have comments, and all the braces, like it just doesn't, it starts to get really nested very quickly. And I was like, there needs to be a good config file, and the Windows INI file to me was like, this is now we're talking here. Like, this is simplicity right here. And the configuration format for the Git configuration files that live in the .git directory actually use this INI file kind of thing. So I've been looking at that from doing GitHub stuff. And I was just like, I wanted something that would unambiguously map to a hash table. This was the thing that I saw as but also was human readable and had comments and things. And so I sat down and I just banged out a spec that was like written in drunk language. Like, it was like, if you go to the TOML repository and you rewind it all the way to the first commit and read it, you'll get a kick out of it, because it's written in a very half serious fashion. And then I just tweeted about it, and I was like, check out TOML. It's my new configuration language. And overnight, like the next day, people had written interpreters for it, had written parsers for it in like 5 or 6 different languages. And it was super minimal. It did very little. It was just basic data structures and tables. And that was the whole thing. But I think it struck a chord with people that felt similarly, that felt that, yeah, like YAML's not getting it done. JSON's not competent enough to do it. And all these other random formats don't have any widespread use. So then just kept working on it, and people kept writing parsers for it. And now you can find TOML parsers in basically every language. And it's used in a bunch of legit projects now. Cargo, the package manager for Rust, uses it officially. A bunch of Python stuff uses it. Netlify uses it for the Netlify config file. So you'll see it in a lot of places now. And it really was, it's another one of exactly this thing that I do, which is there's 100 solutions to this problem. Let's write one more. Well, it turns out I've also done this idea with a bunch of other things, and it doesn't work. But sometimes it does work. Sometimes the one thing that you add is the thing that people actually needed. And so it finally went 1.0. I haven't actively worked on it in quite a while, actually. I turned it over to a maintainer, Produne, who's been primary on it, and finally got past 1.0, which has been on my New Year's resolution list for every year for like 4 years, has been like release TOML 1.0. And it finally happened, and I wasn't even responsible for it. But I love it, because again, it's the idea that you can have a new way to do things. You just put it out into the world and see what happens, and promote it. I mean, you have to do some marketing. You have to get it in front of people. But TOML took a long time to really pick up any steam in real projects. But yeah, check it out. I think sweet spot is simple configuration file. Like, you have some random tool that you're building. It needs 10 configuration things, and you just want something that's going to map unambiguously to a hash table, and you want it to be super easy and fast, and TOML's going to be perfect for that.
Yeah, it's amazing how many ideas just come up. Just I'm just going to mess around, maybe have a beer, whatever. Just start tinkering with ideas.
It's fun. I mean, this is coding at its best. I think this is like the true love of coding. It comes in this fashion, which is like, I just had this idea, and it may turn into nothing, but it's going to be a fun time for a few hours or a few days. and we'll see what happens to it. And I love to keep doing that because it keeps coding fun. And I don't get to do coding as much as I used to. I work kind of at higher leverage points these days, and more, working with teams and figuring out architectures and thinking about product and stuff. But I still love to sit down and write code.
Yeah, one of the ways I like to do things like that is I would submit like weird talk ideas, like just very experimental. Like I haven't built it yet, but I'm like, here's what I'm going to talk about, and it's like once it got accepted, it's like, okay, now I got to build it. But it was a forcing factor of some just crazy idea I had. So,
That's great.
So before we kind of wrap up, I want to talk one more little bit about RedwoodJS. And I know it's been in early stages, and so tell us, like, when can we expect 1.0 and what new is coming? Whatever you can share, I'm excited to hear.
Yeah, we launched the 01. The first public release was in March of last year, and we're hoping to get a proper 1.0 out in March of this year. That still ends up being pretty ambitious. We have some big pieces of functionality that we really want to get in there. We want to have a story around pre-rendering, which is to be able to select certain routes of your application and have them built at build time, which you would expect a Jamstack type of a thing to be able to do. Now, Redwood is really optimized for a dynamic application. And so it ends up being fairly complicated to do this kind of pre-building. Next and others do it with SSR and other types of what they boil down to essentially is caching mechanisms. So like what are the correct set of caching paradigms to use for a full stack web application framework? We're still navigating that, and we want to have a really good story there. That's one missing piece we're actively developing right now. We want to have full TypeScript support, which we're still working on. There's still some bits here and there that don't support that fully, but we're very close on TypeScript as well. Those are two of the main things. There's just a bunch of polishing we need to do. We need to do some accessibility work on the router to make sure that that's going to be a first-class experience for people to be able to get their accessible websites done. Because we wrote our own router, it becomes our responsibility to make sure that accessibility is going to work correctly there. And just a variety of performance tweaks that we need to make. So I think it's getting close. I think we're getting really close, and I think it's going to be really, really exciting. I think a lot of people are waiting for the 1.0 to try it out fully. We have a lot of people experimenting with it. We have a variety of production apps that people have written with Redwood, so you can do it. It's still a little bumpy on the upgrade path because we tend to break things in this pre-1.0 period with a little bit more abandon than we will after 1.0. But hopefully March. We're targeting. All last year I said we'd have it done by the end of the year. Well, we missed that, unfortunately. That was too ambitious. But we're hoping we can hit March here. And go check it out, redwoodjs.com. And for any listeners, if you want some RedwoodJS stickers, if you like what we're doing, you can go to the website there and click on the free stickers, and we'll send you anywhere in the world for free. We'll send you a couple of stickers. So get your swag.
Awesome. Yeah, I toyed with it at some point, I think some months back myself, and I mentioned to you earlier before we came on that the documentation was great. The walkthrough was outstanding. So like anybody who's looking to learn, I mean, it's really easy to get started because the tutorial walks you through the process really, really nicely. So well done to the team on that.
Thank you. Yeah, we wrote the tutorial first. We wrote the tutorial to make it look like what we wanted the framework to be able to do, and then we built the framework to be able to do what we had written in the tutorial. And obviously there was some back and forth to make that possible. But that's why the tutorial is good. That really became the design document. And there's a second tutorial. So if you haven't done the second tutorial, it goes over testing with a storybook and role-based authorization, a bunch of really nice things in there. Redwood console, where you can go in there and you can execute. You can just write database access codes in there and have it just, in the same way that you can with like Rails console. So there's a bunch of cool things to discover in there too. But yeah, documentation is a big priority. The community also is a huge priority. We have an amazing and vibrant community. We want to welcome people of all skill levels on the core team. We have people that have been developers for 20 years, and we have people that have been developers for 6 months, right? Everyone is welcome in the Redwood community, and we would love to see you there.
Awesome. Well, hopefully some people in the audience will decide to join up and contribute, or at least try it out. So, Tom, I want to thank you for your time. This was amazing. I learned a lot. I hope that everybody here did as well. So we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come speak to us. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Had a great time.